How's it going this week, everybody? So this week I'm going to be having Tony on, and he came on to tell me about these supernatural experiences that he has when he came across spiritual Satanism while in college. And his story is really fascinating, and I'm really glad he came on to share it. It's very similar to last week's episode. By the way, for those that don't know, we have a membership. If you head over to challengetheunknown.com, you can check it out for yourself. You get access to episodes 2 weeks before they come out. Thanks for listening.
So about 7 years ago, I was a freshman in college and had just pledged a fraternity at one of the Big Ten schools. You know, I never really thought that it was my style. I just kind of did it. My roommate was one of my good buddies, and he kind of convinced me. We had a great time doing it. But the next semester, I sort of looked at the world and looked at sort of that entire culture and saw where it was going. It was kind of boring to me. You know, you go to the fraternity and then you graduate and you use that connection to, you know, work at a big finance firm and make good money and have a good life sort of thing. Very unoriginal. And I was overcome with this desire to learn. I guess I should preface, I was, you know, borderline agnostic at the time, went to Catholic school as a kid, but never really considered myself Catholic, and had never experienced anything supernatural. And I was really curious. I wanted to know whether there was another layer to reality that I just was overlooking. You know, I think it was important to figure that out. And if I didn't find anything after sincerely looking, then I could just sort of go back to that unoriginal way of life and just, you know, be successful and boring, you know? So I did some research and I came across something called spiritual Satanism. And there are a couple of reasons why I liked it. The first one being it had a very Gnostic approach to spirituality. Sort of everything was hands-on. You weren't expected to believe anything without first experiencing it. And there were guidelines to how to experience certain things that you could follow. You know, I've never really stuck to the whole, you know, pray and believe in God mentality. I think, you know, there's Gnostic Christians that sort of want to experience God and understand Him and at a very spiritual level. I think this was similar. And then the other reason I chose it was it sort of existed outside the duality of good and evil. You know, we all know that the Catholic Church did pretty heinous things in the name of God back in the day. So I didn't really think just because the name was Satanism, it was inherently evil.
Right.
So one of the things spiritual Satanism had you do was it sort of pulled from these Hindu ideas of the chakra system, which was awesome because to me that was like a great hands-on way to experience, you know, spirituality, right? Like you either can feel a chakra or you can't, right? So the third eye was sort of the first chakra they had you open up. And to do that, you really had to, you know, I hadn't meditated before, but I picked up a practice where I began to visualize, and visualization was a big part of the practice. So I would sit down at night and sort of imagine an energy or a light sort of flowing into my body and giving that energy intent, saying, you know, on the in-breath, I'm taking in this golden energy and it's healing, and you know, it's helping it's helping strengthen my mentality, my physicality, all this stuff. So really just working with intent and working with visualization. Once you get good at that, you can sort of move on to this third eye opening experience where every night for 2 weeks, I would meditate, and on the in-breath, I would pull energy into my third eye and try to visualize it. And on the exhale, I would om and direct the vibration of my om to my forehead. So that was really the opening process. And I did that for 2 weeks straight. After that 2 weeks, everything changed. That was really the beginning of a whole new chapter, because I began to feel it. And this was really mind-boggling for me, because even when I wasn't meditating, I would be at class. All of a sudden, I would feel a pressure in my forehead, like a thumb was pushing outward. And the more I sort of allowed myself to focus on that point, the stronger the feeling would get. And it became really distracting. Like, I would be in class and I would feel this pressure and I would start to focus on it. And like, I couldn't pay attention because it was just so crazy to me. So with this sort of new feeling, I began to meditate on that feeling, and at night I would sort of isolate myself, and I would focus on this third eye feeling and just sort of allow myself to fall into it. And slowly but surely, this blue flashing light would begin to pulse in my vision, and my heart rate would always rise, and I'd end up getting scared and I would lose focus. So I'd have to sort of get used to this type of meditation. But eventually I got the hang of it, and that blue pulsing light, if you allow it to sort of thicken and continue, it gives way to these beautiful descriptive visuals that are, you know, and this isn't visualization. This is like, these things are in front of your vision while your eyes are closed. Like, they're there and they're real. Mm-hmm. And the more you fall into this meditation, the stronger and more detailed these visuals get. And I would see beautiful women and monsters and places. And again, like, my heart rate would always rise and I would lose focus. And, you know, every time I would finish, I'd see something, I'd be like, wow, like, this is so cool. Like, what am I seeing? Is this placebo? Is this real? You know, to me, that was sort of the moment where I was like, if this is real, are all the other chakras real? What else? You know, is this specific to spiritual Satanism, or does this exist outside? Is this just like a human function? You know, like, all these questions sort of opened up, and they were so distracting, man. Like, I could not focus on school after sort of opening up this experience, because I was completely taken back by the questions this opened up. After that, you know, I continued meditating, and I would say this entire world sort of opened up to me. I began to see outlines of these energies, these ghostly figures in my dorm room at night. And if I was sleeping, I would sort of wake up and I'd see like a human outline just sort of walk through the wall. And I was like, this is just part of it, you know. This is, I think once you step into that world, you sort of open up to all of it, and it can be a little overwhelming. But I just sort of pulled through. Let's see. So, you know, from that point, some weird things happened here and there. Like one time, one of my toes started to move on its own. And that might sound really weird, but I'd lay in bed and it was on my right foot, the fourth toe would just sort of wiggle. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, this is super weird. And it happened every night for like 2 weeks. So I was like, let me just see what's going on. One night I just laid in bed and just stared at the toe as it was wiggling. And with my third eye, I just sort of like focused on it as I looked at my toe, and the blue outline started to pulse. And a figure started to form around my toe. And the blue light kept pulsing and the figure kept getting clearer. And eventually I was able to see this gremlin munching on my toe. It was this weird, like, tiny thing that was all blue, and it was eating my toe. And I was like, what? So that was like one of the weird sort of minor experiences that happened. And what I ended up doing was visualizing like a shield around my foot, and it never happened again. So I sort of, in this world I had experienced, visualizing shields and like creating defenses was like something you were told to do, because, you know, even if it is all placebo, you're now like existing in this mental world where, you know, imagination sort of is reality in a way. And that doesn't necessarily take away from whether or not these things are real. But I think it sort of makes intention and makes these visualizations have a real effect on your own psyche, right? So at night I was meditating and visualizing like a shield around my room and around myself, because when I didn't, I felt really vulnerable. I felt like crazy entities could, you know, take over my thoughts, or, you know, I'd have sleep paralysis at times, and I'd have these like crazy shadow figures like sitting on my chest. That had never happened to me before. So, you know, the visualizing really helped me, and it helped reinforce, I think, my safety net in the world. So I know I'm throwing a lot out there, but this sort of all ties in together. One night I was at my fraternity, and, you know, I was definitely drinking, and I probably smoked some weed, just having a good time. At this point, I sort of compartmentalized that spiritual side of myself and this fraternity side. They never really conflicted, but this was the first time I think they did, where I was playing Super Smash Brothers with some of the frat guys, and all of a sudden, this really ominous feeling took over, and I was entirely sure that something was attacking me. And, you know, being in that weird impaired state, my visualization wasn't as strong, so I wasn't really able to, you know, put up that shield that I'd been relying on. And as a result, my heart rate started to increase, and I started to get really anxious. And I began to think, am I getting anxious because I can't protect myself, or am I getting anxious because I'm getting attacked? And I sort of started to go down this weird cyclical path, to the point where, you know, I was like, guys, I think I need to go to the hospital. Like, something's going on. They were like, oh, like, you're fine, dude. You're just freaking out. So I ended up lying down on one of their beds in the fetal position, just suffering, just like my heart rate. I felt like it was going to explode. And, I was sure I was going to die at one point. And suddenly this feeling, came over me, this complete terror and this energy, completely enveloped my body. Whatever had been attacking me was gone. This was a new presence. And I was completely and utterly terrified because this was a presence I had never known before. It was different than, if you're sitting in a room and someone's staring at you, you might feel that someone's staring at you and you look behind you. It was like that, but everywhere. I think that's the best way to explain it. That terror ended up turning to love. So that presence sort of flipped on a 180, and I had this entity encounter, and I was speaking with this being that had saved me from whatever attack I had been suffering from. And I was speaking to it telepathically, which was also entirely new to me. It was this weird feeling to feeling talk where it was telling me, sort of counseling me to sort of fix some of the things I'd done. I was failing out of school at the time because I was so obsessed with this spiritual path that I had found. And this being sort of counseled me to tell my parents, first of all. And second of all, just to start moving in a better direction. I felt it open my throat up, so that I could puke. And I immediately felt better. And then I sort of just woke up the next morning. It happened pretty suddenly. And I felt really light, and I felt like my whole world had been torn apart. And that was really like the start and finish of a first chapter, to the supernatural world for me.
Man, that's an intense storyline, man, and I believe you, man. Like, I'm sure you if you said that to a lot of people, I'm sure you'd get a lot of criticism from. But I think that there's a lot of stuff to go over there. So, first thing I want to ask you is, you touched on the idea. I had a guy on last week that had very similar ideology to you, and he suggested also that just because it's imaginary in that realm or whatever doesn't mean that's not real. So do you believe that when there's children and such that see all of these entities like fairies or whatever it is, do you think that they're just more open to it? And then something changes and we're all actually capable of something like this, but something's shifting biologically for us? What do you think? What do you think about all that?
Yeah. I think it is real for children. And I think this idea, when we're adults, is put in that the imaginary world is separate from the physical. And I think when you're a child, you don't have that idea and you don't have that separation. Imaginary is such a weird term because it has this pretext that it's not real, right? Whereas I think other cultures might see imaginary as visionary or astral, right? There are all these terms that we use. I think it needs to be redefined. And real or not real isn't, to me, terminology that can even be applied to it. I think it just is, and I think it has a real effect. I guess I'm saying real now, but I think it has an effect on our psyche. And that makes it important, that means we can't ignore it. And it's an entire element that we ignore in a material culture.
Yeah, man, I think that's really interesting. And I wanted to ask you about What else did I want to ask you about? So let's start off with the gremlin. So can you describe to me in a little bit more detail what this thing looked like? Just as much detail as you can give, man.
It was like hunched over, kind of like fetal-like. I'm trying to think of real-world examples. Can't really think of anything. It was maybe half a foot large, and it was bald, and some of its teeth were missing, and it had like weird ulcers sort of around its mouth. And I remember it noticing me notice it, which was really interesting to me. Yeah, dude, it was just, I'm not sure if the reason my toe was wiggling was because it was eating it, or maybe I had just focused on my toe so much that it sort of noticed that I was directing energy to it, so it was like feasting on that energy, you know? It could have gone both ways. I sort of subscribe to the idea after these experiences that the more you focus on something, the more energy you feed into it. Kind of like if there's a rock in the middle of the woods, you know, it's just a rock. But if a century of people worship the rock as a god, you know, that consolidated focus creates an entity in this astral world, you know, that is the rock, that has real influence, although subtle, over the world. And I think it might have been that, where maybe I had just, for some reason, thought that my toe was moving on its own, and then therefore it was, you know. And yeah, I can go into more about that because there are two other sort of chapters to this story that I want to talk about at some point. But one really goes into that idea that you know, energy and thought can carry outside of the body. But yeah, no, it was a weird thing. Just sort of this weird astral entity.
Yeah, man. It's actually funny that you mentioned that. I was at dinner with this girl back in August, and she had the same opinion. She believes that enough like thought and belief is enough to create something real. So that's an interesting take on it. And we got plenty of time, man. Why don't you keep going? Let's keep going.
Oh, nice. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And, you know, I always think, you know, I don't necessarily believe in God, but I think there are two versions of him that are going around. And one is sort of the transcendent version of God, you know, a version of him that even the term God is limiting sort of the transcendent, omni whatever version of God. And then there's the worshiped God, sort of the more material one. And I think, like, you know, if that theory holds true, like you can imagine all of the people that worship God pouring energy into it. You know, that rock idea from earlier applied to, you know, to this idea of God, it really could sort of open up a lot of doors. But anyway, so after that entity experience, I ended up having a summer by myself at college. I was taking a couple courses, and I continued to really dive deeper into this world. My next stop was to open up the crown chakra. So I would sit and visualize sort of like a cone pointing downward, a purple cone that was seated in my brain. And on the in-breath, I would visualize energy pouring into it. And on the out-breath, I would visualize it spinning. And the more energy I pulled into it, the faster it span. And I did this for about a week, maybe an hour a day. And by the end of the week, something had happened where all of a sudden that spinning just continued after I had visualized it. And it kept ramping up. And my entire body became light. Not like sunlight, like heavy light, like my weight just sort of like fell from me, and I felt like I was bouncing around, and I was all of a sudden just really euphoric, and I realized I was high, and I was like, oh my God, like this is incredible. And I was just smiling ear to ear, and I left my dorm room and just sort of walked around for like 3 hours in this total state of bliss. And I could 100% feel my crown chakra just sort of like emanating and pulsing in my head. And I've never experienced that again. That was sort of the last time I tried to experience it. But to me, that was like, okay, if the third eye is real and the crown chakra is real, I think everything's real. And they can all sort of be tapped into. And, I started to really, I guess, fall off the deep end. In spiritual Satanism, there's this idea that, Satan is this person who wants human beings to, just be self-aware, and self-awareness, sort of starts with unlocking your spiritual identity. And there's a race of advanced entities that, want this for humans. And then there's also, of course, the race of entities that don't, right? So it's kind of like this weird fantasy story of, these two warring advanced civilizations over the state of human consciousness, right? Pretty dramatic. And it was a part of spiritual Satanism that I had ignored up until that point, where I experienced that entity come down and save me. But afterward, I sort of couldn't ignore it, and I really started to become paranoid that I was tapping into something that a race of entities didn't want exposed. And every negative feeling that I had, I associated with an attack. And so you can sort of see the downward spiral effect that can have on someone, and the isolating effect it had on me, to the point where I realized I desperately needed to ground myself and just sort of reevaluate what I was getting into. I was like, at that point, if I go any farther, I could very much see myself going crazy. I was lucky enough to have a friend's father introduce me to Zen Buddhism, which totally saved me and helped me sort of piece back together my psyche and my reality. So I ended up getting into Zazen, and which is the Zen meditation. And for those of you not familiar with Zazen, it's very much a meditation that it's simple. It's just breathing and coming back to the present moment. There's no visualization. There's no worship. There's no energy or chakra systems. It's very simple. But the simplicity of it sort of transcends everything. You can, no matter what situation you're in, no matter what your mental state is, you can always meditate and do Zazen, and it'll always have some sort of benefit. And that's the beauty of it. So I ended up spending 3 weeks at a Buddhist monastery, really just, working on myself and trying to understand what the next steps were for me. Sort of realizing that I didn't want to dive back into that world without any support. I was like, if I'm gonna study the chakra system or the astral world or get into this, I'd want a mentor of some sort. I was lucky enough to talk to a Buddhist master who, I asked him what he thought of the metaphysical world. And, he said, Zazen and Zen Buddhism isn't, their focus isn't metaphysical, but if you sort of step out of the way, that metaphysical aspect will find you. But it doesn't matter because you're still going to come back and meditate, and you're still going to come back to the mat and focus on your breath work. So I thought that was really cool. It sort of helped me shift my focus and really helped my ideas mature. And after the fact, I would study some Buddhist texts. I read Siddhartha, which was also huge for me. And I ended up going to a much smaller school up north. And this sort of leads me to, I guess, the last real chapter in the story. So this school is the type of school, it's really isolated in the woods, and everybody there either is a witch or thinks they're a witch. So you can imagine sort of the type of characters that are there. Everybody's sort of experimenting with like spells and energy work, this and that. And I found this metaphysical group that was led by a biology teacher, or professor rather. And I joined it just because I was sort of curious to see what people were doing there. And it was really, it was cool. There were, some people who were studying astral projection, some people who were getting into tarot card reading. You had mediums and like all sorts of like crazy stuff happening. And, I felt like it was a safe place for me to sort of further explore some of these ideas. One thing that I got into was energy work. And it sort of started with me and a couple buddies that I had met, sort of with our hands creating like a bowl in front of us, and then visualizing energy pouring into that bowl and assigning an element to it. So whether it was fire, earth, electricity, water, whatever it was. And once you had this sort of energy poured into your hand, someone else would take 2 fingers, dip those fingers into that bowl, and then try to close their eyes and visualize whatever that energy was. And so the whole purpose of these experiments was, can thought exist outside of the mind, right? And lo and behold, every single time, as long as someone was focused, I would say 90% of the time, we would get it right. I would be able to guess what element someone had in that bowl, and they would be able to do so for me. And we ended up doing this back and forth so often that we got more advanced, where we would, rather than an element, how about a picture of like a boat on water? Could you see that? How detailed could we get these pictures, these visualizations in the bowls in our hands? And how strong, how well could we interpret these visuals? So that was really cool. And that sort of, to me, solidified this idea that, that thought could exist outside of the mind. And again, sort of opened up all these possibilities for me. what does that mean for the world, right? Like, if thought can exist outside of the mind and we can tap into it, there's clearly a lot we're missing.
What do you think these entities are, man? Let me start with that. What do you like with a lot of these entities? Where do you think they exist? Do you think they exist in different light spectrums? Do you think that they exist in like some type of dimensional? Like let me know your thoughts on that. What do you think these things are?
That is a good question. I think I'm not sure what, from a dimensional perspective, or from a light spectrum perspective, what this means. I do think that there is part of our mind that I think has the ability to interpret or to experience this level of visualization. I always thought that evolution might have provided humanity a way to solve some of those abstract issues like existential dread and overpopulation and all these things that we suffer from. Maybe it is just DMT. Maybe as we flex our brains and this visualization muscle, we're releasing DMT. And maybe that's what the third eye is. I don't know. I think I've read a bunch of studies on it, but I'm not a scientist. I'm not really sure, what would be right in that regard.
Yeah, man, I've looked into the DMT idea a lot, actually, and a lot of people think that DMT it causes something else to happen. It's really interesting, and I remember watching a video on it a couple months ago of these two guys that did DMT, and they both saw the same entity, which was really interesting. So,
oh, wow.
It's really interesting to look into that whole topic, man. It really makes you wonder what's going on that we're not aware of.
Dude, that is, I think, the biggest revelation for me. Like, I fully believe in those DMT experiences, but I strongly believe that what I experienced, there's definitely a recipe for unlocking that world sober and being able to do it on the fly. And I strongly believe that, that there is sort of a next level of human evolution that exists in some of the studying and some of the experiences that I had. Third eye visualization and sort of like these thought experiments, it really just opens up like all these doors. Like, does the government know about this? Does, what does it mean for the next step in human evolution? It's really mind boggling the more you think about it. But it's scary too, man. Like it's like, as intriguing as it is, like the farther you get into it, I think the scarier it gets, because you're treading madness the whole time, especially when you don't have any guidance.
Yeah, man, it's really, really interesting stuff right there. And something that I always like to point out from a scientific perspective is there is without a doubt stuff that we don't know about yet. And there's without a doubt stuff that we can't measure yet because we just don't have the instruments for it yet. So one of the things that I always like to point out is, imagine you took scientists from a few hundred years ago and you took them to see the aurora, the lights in the sky, the green streaks in the sky. They would be able to visualize that they could see it. They could see this phenomenon, but they would have no understanding of it, and they wouldn't be able to measure it with any type of tools that they had at the time period. So these Victorian era scientists would be able to see it, but they couldn't understand it. And it makes me wonder, when we get into the paranormal topics and a lot of the spiritual stuff, is what if this is just something that we don't have the tech to measure yet? What if it's all real? What if it's all within a light spectrum or another dimension or something like that. And what if we just can't see it, but all of these, crazy people, quote unquote, that have experiences, what if they've actually seen it, but we're just not there yet from a scientific perspective. We just can't measure it. So, I believe you, man. I think that your story is really compelling, and I think it's going to help a lot of people. That's the really important thing, is that some people are going to hear this episode and be like, hey, maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe my sleep paralysis demon that I've seen isn't just in my head, And are you familiar with the backstory of sleep paralysis?
Maybe not. I mean, I've definitely had it a couple times, but I don't really understand it.
So the first real documented accounts of sleep paralysis were around 1300, and it's just like you described.
That's pretty late.
Yeah, right. But then again, it's like, how much shit were we really keeping track of around this time period? There's probably stuff that we've tracked for a lot longer that just didn't get written down. So, written history can be quite unreliable, especially with the shifts in civilizations and power, over history. So stuff gets lost sometimes, but the earliest account that we know about is around 1300. And what's interesting to me is this phenomena. They all describe the same thing. It's like paralyzed with these entities, and the night hag in particular, the thing that sits on your chest. And that's actually where the term nightmare comes from.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's where the term nightmare originates from.
Mare is in horse, right?
Mare is in terror, I'm pretty sure is the Latin translation. Let me double check that real quick. But yeah, that's the major thing is it all ties back. It's really interesting. So the whole concept of nightmare. Yep, here it is. Okay, so mare in folklore is a malicious entity in Slavic folklore. That's what mare means when it's translated literally. So because people were experiencing this entity that was sitting on them, it was the mare that came at night, and that's where it all originates from. And so it's nightmare. That's where the term nightmare comes from.
I wonder what that shared experience means. That is, is it an entity, or is it like a conjuring of like a universal human fear? It's really bizarre.
It is bizarre, man. And, modern scientists have studied sleep paralysis to try and figure out what's going on. And, it's a lot of your mind's in a certain state and all this kind of stuff. But
unsatisfying answers, right?
Exactly. It's unsatisfying answers. It's like, I remember there was something on the Agent Alien theory where a bunch of scholars chalked it all up to be, it's all nothing but mass hallucination. And I'm like, that doesn't happen. People don't mass hallucinate the same thing by the thousands, And at this point, millions of people have experienced sleep paralysis at this point, including myself, So have you
experienced that entity sitting on your chest?
I've never seen the entity, but I've had sleep paralysis, and it's caused the hallucinations to where I was like tripping. It was not a good time. Yeah, dude. I've had a couple sleep paralysis instances, and I think a lot of it was chalked up to me just not sleeping well, but I've never seen the entity, but I do know that there was one time where I was in this like time loop, right? And what was happening is I would wake up, I couldn't see my hands, like I would lift up my hands and my hands were gone, And then I would kind of feel sick, get up to go puke, and then it would reset and I would be waking up again. And this happened like on repeat, and I tried to break the cycle. And I just couldn't break the cycle. And this went on for a while, and it felt like an eternity, But eventually I like woke up for real, like sat up just like I did in that time loop, but in real life. And I looked at it and I saw my hands, and I was like, all right, my hands are here. you know? And I kind of came back down and I was like, holy shit. Like, it was one of the craziest things.
That reminds me of? What's that Greek myth of the guy who's chained up on a rock and like an eagle or a falcon like rips him open and eats his liver, and then like the next day he grows it back and it comes again and eats his liver. It's like sort of this like endless suffering time loop that you were on, you know?
That was Prometheus.
Oh, Prometheus, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Maybe you were just tapping into a Greek mythos.
Who knows, brother? It was such a weird experience, man. And the more people I talk to when it comes to sleep paralysis, the weirder shit gets, man. The weirder it gets. So
bizarre. Yeah, you know, those shared experiences definitely, I think, point to a deep, misunderstanding when it comes to, like you said, where our science knowledge is. You know, I will say this, you know, after all my experiences, I ended up failing out of college again. My dad was like, I'm done. You're paying for the rest. I was like, fair enough. So I did, 7 years working in a corporate 9-to-5, and I sort of put all this stuff on the back page. I paid off school and I finished out, and, I did Zazen here and there, just whenever I felt like I needed to. But the one thing that 7 years later, even though I've completely sort of put this world, in the back of my mind, my third eye will still light up in like moments of intuition, or if I focus on it, it's still there. So it goes to show how tangible this experience is. And I think like really goes to show how capable we are to sort of experiencing the supernatural. I think that the human body has the tools to do it. Anybody who's willing and has, a sincere desire to learn, and to experience things gnostically, I think can. And I highly doubt it has anything to do with spiritual Satanism. I just think that was sort of the catalyst for me. I think that you can find it really anywhere. I think it starts with an earnest desire to learn.
100%, brother. And I mean, your story was really, really fascinating. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that find value in it 100%.
I hope so. Yeah, no, I really appreciate you reaching out and letting me share. To be honest, I was nervous because every time I talk about it, I sort of get sweaty and like my hands start to shake, because it is like, one of those moments in my life that really shook me to the core, sort of like an ontological shock. But I appreciate you having me on.
Anytime, brother. And I think we're about ready to wrap this up. We're sitting at 47 minutes. So we got a real solid episode right there. And thanks again for coming on, man. And we'll be in touch.